Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Skill Sessions. It's very lovely to have you on the call. I don't know if it's just me, but I always dance to that recording at the start. It's a good way to start the webinar. So yes, please say hello in the chat and let me know where you're joining from today. I'm in Bristol. It's nice and sunny, if not a little cold, hence the fluffy jumper. But yes, please do say hello in the chat and let me know where you're joining from. So Pete from Nottinghamshire County Council. Hello, Pete. Gail, it is very boppy. Yes, I do agree with you, Gail. Waving from Bristol too. Hello. And just a reminder, the chat always gets super busy and we are really proud of the sense of the community that we've built on Skill Sessions. So just to make sure that your messages are being sent to everyone, change your chat settings from hosts and panelists to everyone, and then you can all join in the conversation together. We've got Thomas from Manchester, Claire from Berkshire, Scotland, lovely, Devon, London, Plymouth, fabulous. Far-reaching, Skill Sessions is far-reaching. I think some of you have been with us before, so again, let me know if you are a first-timer to Skill Sessions or whether you've been to quite a few of these events. We do get quite a lot of people coming back and joining us. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat as well. We've got Peter from Newcastle upon Tyne. Hello, lovely to see all of your messages coming in. Do keep it coming. I have a feeling that today is going to be a very insightful session, but before I introduce our guest speakers, I just want to welcome you all to Skill Sessions. So whether you are brand new to these events or you've been with us before, welcome and thank you so much for coming along. We are nearing 2 years of Skill Sessions and there's a community of over 2,000 of you now. And we really hope that you're enjoying them as much as we enjoy hosting them. The main reason that we do these events is to bring you experts and to bring you speakers on a range of topics around diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in the workplace. You can always find information about our next events on the CareScribe website. We have a new webinar coming up about reasonable adjustments and one for managing employees with dyslexia coming up soon that you can now book onto. And we also have all of our past event recordings available for you to watch back at your leisure with summaries and additional information and resources for you to explore. So just head to the CareScribe website, but I also believe a member of the team is dropping a link in the chat as well. Now, Skill Sessions events are hosted by the team at CareScribe. So who are CareScribe? Well, we're an award-winning software company based in Bristol, and we create assistive technology to help people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities to be more productive and confident in their work and in their studies. We have 2 products, Captioned, which is note-taking and captioning software, which helps people capture and comprehend the piles of information that gets thrown at them either at work or in education. So providing Captioned in your workplace can help retain talent, boost well-being and bolster productivity, and all of which ultimately impacts your bottom line. We also have TalkType, which is highly accurate lightning fast dictation software which works on all platforms. So that's Mac, Windows, Chromebook, and on mobile as well. So if you want to find out more about how either of those products can help improve your organisation, or you're just curious to see the product in action, please drop a message in the chat and one of our team will reach out to you after the webinar today. Okay, so if you've been with us before, you probably know the drill. So bear with me whilst I run through some general housekeeping. We'll be sharing the recording of today's session in your follow-up email tomorrow, and there'll be a feedback survey in the chat. So when you exit the webinar, this is also where you can let us know how you found the session and you can request a certificate of attendance. In terms of how to get the most from the next hour, well, many of you are already doing this, but I do encourage you to please join in the chat and talk with other people on the call. Just remember to change the setting from hosts and panelists to everyone. I do appreciate that the chat can be a bit distracting for some people. So if you need to, you can turn off chat previews and you can mute your notifications. And if you have any questions for the Not on the High Street panel about working groups, today's topics, if you can just put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And what that means is it doesn't get lost in the chat. It sometimes gets quite busy. So any questions that you have throughout the next hour, pop them in the Q&A section, which there's a big button at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote questions, so I know which ones to put to the speakers as a matter of priority. And finally, as I mentioned at the start, this webinar is being recorded. So you'll receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a recording and a full transcript, which is generated by Captioned. Right, so I'm just going to check the chat just to make sure we've still got people joining us. Fabulous. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to our guest speakers for today. So whilst Ben and Noor join me on screen, I'll give them a very quick introduction. Joining us from Not on the High Street is Ben Bushby and Noor Al-Naimi. So the Senior People Experience Manager and the Head of Legal at Not on the High Street, Ben and Noor, are equity, diversity and inclusion advocates. As the former chair of their diversity working group, Noor has demonstrated firsthand the leadership, commitment and the vision required to create a culture where DE&I is not just a goal, but a shared responsibility embraced by everyone. And Ben is an active member of the diversity working group, but his passion comes from his role, where making sure that people feel supported, connected, and respected is integral. So, hi both. Thank you for joining us today. I'll leave you to it for the next 40 minutes, and then I will be back armed with everyone's questions. Bye.
Amazing. Thanks for the intro, Claire. Noor, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see that screen okay?
I can, yeah.
Amazing.
Hi,
cool.
everyone.
Can't really ask everyone else on the call. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. So obviously, yeah, we're Ben and Noor from Not on the High Street. Today we're just going to talk a little bit around working groups and how that's really helped our kind of like EDI efforts here at Not on the High Street. So I think a good place to start before we tell you a little bit about ourselves is probably tell you a little bit about Not on the High Street. So we are a female-founded company. We were founded in 2006 and last year celebrated our 18th birthday, so finally becoming adults. How would I summarize Not on the High Street? So I would say we're a marketplace for small brands and businesses. We currently have just over 5,000 partners, and our partners are the small brands and small businesses that sell across our site. Those 5,000 partners selling just over 350,000 products, and we have a customer base of just over 4 million. I'd call us a curated marketplace, which means that we're quite, not picky isn't the right word, but we make sure that the partners that we bring on site actually align with us, our mission, our vision, and actually only 5% of partners that apply actually make it to site. So definitely a curated place. Internally, we're a team of 100 people split across 6 kind of core departments. So, and then if I transition into us, Noor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to virtually meet you. And thanks, Claire, for the lovely introduction. So I'm Noor. I'm head of legal at Not on the High Street. I've been with the business now for almost 6 years. And I'm born and raised in the UK and Middle Eastern by background. I'm also Muslim, and those kind of components have made up why D&I is so important to me. Very much from like a lived experience point of view. I didn't have parents that had like really fancy jobs or anything like that growing up. So particularly when I entered into my career and when I reflect on my career, there's quite a lot of microaggressions that I suffered. Nothing really traumatic, but it's amazing how you don't even necessarily register that until a lot later in your career. So for me, having gone through different workplaces, different experiences, it's really important that I now, as more of a senior person in a company, have the influence to try and shape and change that wherever I can. So if I just like reflect on the couple of things that have come out, I'd say from my reflections, it's almost 2 different themes on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. So the first one is this unintentional invasiveness, I'd say, on lifestyle. So if I think about being a junior lawyer and going to networking events, one of the first things that you're often presented with is wine on the table and maybe what alcohol people particularly like or that they're going to drink. And immediately that would, from my side of things, put me on almost a back foot where I'd share that I didn't drink, which was absolutely fine. That's my choice. But then that would result often in a spiraling of questions of why I don't drink, have I ever drank, do I go to a mosque? and this kind of what should be a seemingly surface level initial conversation with anyone suddenly feeling really personal, really invasive, and just a lot of assumptions and again, unintentional, I'm sure, judgment. And then again, like the person next to me with their partner might be talking about something really light touch, like, you know, how they got there that day. So for me, that's been one reflection of this, like, it almost like over need to justify your lifestyle choices or why you do what you do or what you do. So I'm really keen on making sure that people don't feel like they have to do that, because there's more that unites us than differentiates us. And then the other side of that, I'd say, is almost being overlooked entirely. So, you know, again, if I take things like fasting and Ramadan, where you don't drink or eat from sunrise to sunset, then it's almost this odd living experience where I'm going through that and maybe no one at work knows that, or if they do, they're maybe, you know, maybe a bit scared to ask anything about it. And it's not really acknowledged or noticed at all, despite it taking up quite a lot of my, like, that month. Or maybe I go to an event and actually it's just the bacon roll that's on offer for breakfast, and there's no non-meat alternative. Or, you know, maybe it's prosecco in champagne glasses ready to serve, and there's an assumption that almost they're scrambling if you're like, is there anything else you can give me? Or you get like the secondary tumbler that's almost like a plastic tumbler for kids for the person that's not drinking, while everyone else has a lovely fancy glass. So it's these kind of small things. I know they're small, but it does lead to this perpetual feeling, or it has certainly for me in the past, of never really belonging anywhere and always being a bit different. And so, like I said, I'm really keen to change that narrative where I can, and really proud of the things that we've done at Not on the High Street to really try and move that needle. Because for me, it's really important that everyone feels not only valued, but understood, celebrated, represented. Over to you, Ben.
Amazing. I think first of all, just thank you for being so vulnerable and honest with that, Noor. Like, that's a really personal story there. So yeah, I'm Ben. I'm the senior people experience manager here at Not on the High Street. I've been here for about a year and a half. And I think what I'd say, whilst I don't necessarily have kind of the lived experiences that Noor's spoken around, I've worked in the people space for roughly 10 years now. And I think throughout that time, I've like seen firsthand the incredible impact that diverse teams bring to businesses. On a more personal note, I do have two young children. So I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and have kind of seen the importance of inclusive workplaces, both for my partner's return to work after parental leave and the accommodations and the support that she's luckily received there, but then also more now in terms of the caregiving responsibilities that I have and what our wider team have. So really, really feel strongly and passionate about this space and what more we can be doing as a collective to get there. If I go on to this, so I think first off, before we get into the presentation, I'm just going to, a bit of a disclaimer is that we are by no means experts in this space. Like, we don't have formal qualifications, we don't have degrees. We've also made mistakes along the way, and we've taken lessons from that, and we've built on that, and we've iterated. And I think ultimately how I see this is that we are a group of people here at Not on the High Street, in terms of our DWG and wider organization, that have a passion for DEI, and we're all coming at it from a very positive place, and we're trying to drive positive change across the business. So as a prerequisite here, I think this is just a bit of a disclaimer up front.
Yeah, thank you. Important to say. So what we thought we would do is maybe start off a little bit with the history of DE&I at Not on the High Street. And this will come very much from my lens, just because I've been with the business for 6 years. So I'll start it from 2019, which is when I joined. And when I joined Not on the High Street, you know, it's a lovely company. It very much mirrors the external brand that you see on site. So it's always had a really warm, caring culture, full of people who are really well intentioned in what they do, which is obviously an amazing start for me as a new joiner. That was brilliant. But what I'd say it lacked is the internal makeup was largely white female, and then that actually filtered through, I'd say, to our seller base as well. And so I think then what you have is this knock-on effect of, you know, underrepresented groups not being seen or recognized. You know, again, not intentionally, but that's just how it goes if you have a makeup of maybe opinions are less diverse. And particularly we are in the gifting space in terms of celebrations. Largely the celebrations that we would show on site would be Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day. So there were so many other festivals that, weren't really surfaced on our website. And as I say, so the reflection for me was seeing the site, the product imagery, the seller base, and the internal base was kind of very much fit to one demographic. And then we sadly had George Floyd's death in May 2020. And that was what I'd say was the real opportunity for growth within the business, because it was obviously very topical. There were people in work that were particularly affected by what had happened and the Black Lives Matter movement thereafter. And so there was this opportunity really to get together and to finally make some changes. So we had our senior management team who offered to come together and speak to anyone who wanted to listen. And actually, I think this is a really good starting point for anyone really early on in their D&I journey in a company, because it just gives those people a space to, air their grievances. It's not necessarily always about the workplace. It just might be their lived experience so far, previous workplaces, previous career choices. Or it could just be something that they really care about. They might not identify with a minority background, but they feel really passionately. And those views are also really important. So we had this space with senior management where we aired our opinions about how we could do better, where we saw kind of the failings and the learnings. And we had an external specialist as well that came in and facilitated some of those discussions to really make them productive and to kind of bring forth some really actionable steps. And from that, our first D&I group was born, which was amazing. Like, first time the business had ever done it, loads of people who were super passionate about it. And there was so much ground to cover. We have, as a business, multi-layers. We have our partners, i.e. our sellers, we have our customers, we have our internal colleagues, candidates, if we're trying to diversify our pool. There's just so many different angles. So it's quite an overwhelming place to start. And I think that certainly, like, how we approached it in the best way that we could wasn't necessarily the best way to get an effective group up and running. So we split initially into different subgroups, and we had like one team focusing on customers, one team focusing on staff. And there were some great successes from that, don't get me wrong. Like, we finally started to do things like build collections on site that were catered towards, a different festival like Diwali. We had data that we started to try and gather on our seller database, and like what demographics existed, and where was there an issue, or where did we want to try and grow. But as I said, like, there was still a lot that we could have done around structure, and it was a little bit all over the place. We didn't really have one united group because we were all in subgroups. And actually, a lot of the stuff that we were doing still really fell on the diversity and inclusion group, rather than on the wider business, rather than trying to make it everyone's responsibility. And it lacked a bit of focus. So over time, and we'll get to that later, we refined that and really managed to bring in a structure that we think works well for us. And we hope that, you can take inspiration from that. And I'd say that we started to do that more around July 2023, and we've stuck to that and iterated it and evolved it ever since. But that was really where we started to succeed. And I'll pass on to Ben now, who'll talk about the best way to set this up.
Amazing, thanks, Noor. Yeah, so I think when me and Noor sat down to write this presentation, we wanted to make it kind of as tangible and as actionable as possible. So we've kind of split it into two parts. So we have part one, we'll talk around diversity working groups and kind of a guide there. And then I think a second part around how can we make it everyone's responsibility. Yeah, another disclaimer from me. These are our views, and this is what's worked best for us within Not on the High Street. So you might find that your company, your business, these might not be the best way to tend to approach this. But ultimately, I think we hope it just offers some food for thought or some inspiration for you to take away, really. So getting into the best way to set up and sustain an effective working group, we've come at it from 4 key steps. I think step 1, which I'll talk around a little bit, is finding your passionate people. And when I talk around passionate people, I mean people who might share a minority demographic, but also even more as important is those that don't. And some ways that you can kind of look to identify these passionate people is I would say one of the things we've spoken around in the past is look for employees who've shown interest in DEI initiatives or may have voiced concerns from a DEI perspective within your organization, anybody that may have attended relevant events. And I think you can send a call out for these people. So a company-wide message on your Slack or Teams comms, or a 5-minute slot at the beginning of a company takeover or something like that. It's so important that no doubt there are lots of these people within your organizations who feel passionate about this space and want to help, and they sometimes just need the person to be the catalyst to get this started. I think the other thing that I would say within the passionate people space is diverse representation within there is so important. And when I talk about diverse representation, I don't just mean like race, ethnicity necessarily. I think diversity across lots of different demographics, age, gender, education, and then also even within your business specifically. So from junior levels to very senior levels and different departments, representation there, all of those viewpoints become so important. And when you're looking to kind of build and sustain a really effective working group. And then I think my final point that I would say around the passionate people is make sure it's voluntary and not assigned. So I think the voluntary side of things here at Not on the High Street, our diversity working group is made up of complete volunteers. And I think voluntary will be people who naturally care about DEI and more likely to sustain the effort that you're looking to have across your organization. Step 2, I'm going to pass over to you, Noor.
Thanks, Ben. Next slide, please. So we spoke about giving it structure in July 2023, how we feel that we brought this together in a really good and condensed way. We had lots of paperwork and lots of documentation before, but if anything, as I said, I think it was almost overwhelming, not only to the group, but also trying to present that to a wider business and showing so many different pillars, so many different things to think about. You know, especially if you don't come from a minority demographic, is almost potentially like a bit of a deterrent. So we went back to kind of the basics as a group and thought, okay, look, what is our purpose here? What are our values? What are we trying to achieve? Who do we support? What does the group actually do here? You know, what's your role as a champion, a D&I champion? But also what's within our decision-making remit? Like, we need to be realistic, but also there's enough here to have some impact. And as Ben kind of alluded to, you know, what are our ways of working? Like, can we define some roles here? So I was informally the chair, but actually in July 2023, I became the formal chair rather than it just being something that, you know, as someone who was passionate about and had been there from a very early stage of the D&I journey, had taken it on. And having someone from the very top to be the sponsor, so a senior leadership team sponsor, which meant that, you know, you would have this buy-in right from the top. You'd have someone listening to those discussions that could feedback, that could influence as well. And also we had leadership representation as much as we could. So next slide. And then this is our genuine strategy. But again, as Ben said before, this is just what we think works for us as a business. And we hope you can take inspiration from it. And there might be things that you would like to use, which is, you know, great. But please, like, it's not, you know, it's not gospel or anything like that. It's very much for you to use and to take inspiration from for your business. So if I bring this to life, then we came up with our purpose as being, it's to unite and empower. We foster diversity and inclusion. We strengthen belonging, allyship, and visibility for underrepresented groups amongst colleagues, customers, and our partners. And from my perspective, inclusion really needs to be at the forefront of anything to do with purpose, because you can, if you want to have more diverse, you know, makeup, let's say internally or externally from a customer perspective, people are, you know, not going to stay unless they feel that they're included. It's really the crux of, in my opinion, a good purpose. So if you build, like I say, if you build on diversity without inclusion, it won't last very long. If you start from inclusion and you start from this belonging, you're more likely to sustain the diversity. And then obviously we come up with different values as a team. And this is really important because even if you're in one group, we come from so many different teams. We think very differently. We have different motivations for being there, different demographics that make up who we are. And actually that in itself can breed a lot of challenges, which I think we need to, as a group, anyone in a D&I group just needs to welcome that, like that it's meant to be somewhere that you have those difficult discussions. It's not the same as, you know, a BAU work project that everyone gets involved in. It's much more emotive at times, and things can sometimes get lost in translation, or, you know, there can be differing or competing aims. So it's really important, I think, to have values that you all adhere to, all agree to, and all remember, so that if actually maybe something is lost in translation, you remember that actually we all agreed that everyone has positive intent here, that we're going to respect one another, that it's a really open space. So that's kind of our way of bringing that together, and it's very much different from what our company values are. It's our own group values, and as I say, really important for us to try and make sure that we cultivate that psychologically safe space within us. And then again, who are we there to support? I mean, it's self-explanatory, but it's good to be explicit about it. We're there to support our colleagues, our customers, and our partners. And by colleagues, we mean candidates as well. It's really trying to have that ripple effect in society. Because again, like if people feel like they belong more in a workplace, or if people even just feel that they understand maybe a different, someone else's different experience, they have neighbors or friends or people that they know who may also share that demographic. So it's a really powerful message and a really powerful thing to get involved in, because it has such a ripple effect. And then we spoke about what our group's role was. So we came up with 3 pillars of inclusion, which is to amplify voices, to foster a community, and to lead by example. So if we talk about amplifying voices, thanks, Ben, we mean there that we champion underrepresented voices. We share different experiences, we listen to different perspectives, we provide visibility and resources to try and strengthen that belonging piece, so that people feel that they're represented within the company, whether that's internal or external in terms of what they see. We foster a community. So again, that's trying to make sure that people, connect with one another, they learn more. As you can see there, we decided to mark certain dates in the calendar, which I'll come to later, to really try and focus on, okay, how do we build this community from all the different demographic angles? And then we lead by example. We serve as role models. We uphold those values that you saw. We hold each other accountable too, and we make sure that we have an open feedback loop with maybe the people team, leadership, senior leadership, making sure that we're able to constantly, have that impact all the way up, to the teams maybe that are more traditionally responsible for D&I. And again, like really, really making sure that there's this open dialogue and this impact that we're having. Next slide. Oh, sorry, actually, just maybe, Ben, if you go back one slide, because I think what's important here as well is that we've also called out within those inclusion pillars certain examples, real initiatives that you can use within those pillars to bring those aims to life. So as I said, the feedback loop we've mentioned, under fostering a community, you can't expect a business to automatically know what they should do, as in the staff within it, if they're maybe, particularly if they're not from a minority demographic. So you've really got to educate people and provide that training and empower the managers to feel comfortable enough to have that conversation with their direct report that may observe Ramadan or that may be celebrating Diwali, for example. And then, we wanted to build on amplifying voices by building resources of, like, here's how you can get involved. If you want to share your story, please feel free to. Here's how to get in touch. Can we have a company-wide meeting where we have a bit of a takeover and we focus on something that's coming up, an event, or even what the group's just been doing, and again, like, have this call to action of please get involved. So that's kind of the kind of real world, I guess, initiatives under each of these pillars to bring it to life. Next slide. And then, as I said, I don't know if anyone here has ever looked at a D&I calendar online, but it can be really overwhelming. It is full of events, and it can be almost, I think, again, a bit of a deterrent in terms of starting, because you don't know what you should mark. And so that was definitely a challenge that we had as a group early on. We were trying to make sure we were being everything to everyone, and it's been much more effective for us to just pause, look at the events, and come up as a group with maybe 13, which is what we've come up with, events which we would like to mark from different demographics. We've got Mental Health Awareness Week, Pride, Black History Month, Diwali, Christmas, Ramadan and Eid, Women in Tech, because we want to, build on the gender diversity point there. Purple Tuesday, lots of events, but enough that also it's focused, where we feel that we can actually make an impact. And we'll show later how we've tried to do that in practice as well. But again, I'd say that's been another really good way of kind of focusing and having a real impact as a group. And I'll pass on to Ben to cover the other steps.
Amazing, thanks, Noor. Yeah, so step 3 for us is the keep communicating part. And when we say around this, there's like the age old saying you need to repeat something 7 times to land the message. I think even more so in this space where we need to be talking about it and embedding it and constantly referring back to the work that we're doing. So some of the ways that we've done this and we would suggest is just regular internal updates and sharing progress with the wider company in terms of what you're working on, what you're working towards, some of the dates that Noor mentioned a second ago, like signposting to them and explaining around that. I think another thing around communication is that leadership buy-in element and keeping leadership teams or senior leadership teams informed and ask for their support. So like Noor said, in terms of structure for us, we have an SLT representative who is part of the group, and that really, really helps that from top down, DEI is being considered across the business. And then a big part is like celebrate the wins along the way. So I think it's so important to acknowledge progress that you make on it. And even small steps like have a bigger impact over a period of time, right? So celebrating it helps maintain that motivation and talks around all of the great things that you're working towards. And then finally, I think it's that the product head in me a little bit is the feedback, review, and iterate part to it. So nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So you need to constantly review it. How are you progressing? What more needs to be done? And some of the ways like collecting feedback. So we've created like anonymous feedback loops from people. So whether that's during offboarding when people are leaving an organization, whether it's through check-in surveys, whatever that might be, we've created channels for that to happen. And we regularly meet to assess our impact, see what the initiatives we're talking around are meeting what we're trying to do in terms of goals. We run retrospectives as a team to talk around like what do we need to continue, what do we need to stop, what do we need to invent, and what action are we going to take forward from this. And having those conversations alongside a more of a structure, we feel really sets ourselves up for success in terms of running an effective working group. So hopefully there's some inspiration there. I think what I will say is there have been some learnings along the way there, and just a few ones I would flag is that we are all volunteers that do this. So we still have our jobs that we do on alongside all of this, obviously. So getting like the cadence, the frequency of meetings is really, really important. And also using that time wisely for when you do come together. So what do you do during meeting time versus what do you deal with asynchronously? And what can be achieved outside of that meeting has been a really big learning. I think there's 2 ones that really, really stick with me in terms of learning. So one is recognizing that like business performance can actually have an impact on what you're trying to achieve. So there's times where there's pinch points, there's deadlines, it's really, really busy. And it's understanding that you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver necessarily, but it's about being realistic with yourself that you're a group of volunteers, you can only achieve so much, but knowing that small things over a period of time actually have a really, really positive impact. And that consistency piece is so key because I think all of us on this call probably know that when we're talking around DEI, there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't like the one way to address absolutely everything. It is these smaller incremental changes over a period of time done well that actually have a more significant impact. And the last big learning for me, Noor spoke about this a second ago, but embracing those diverse perspectives is recognizing that there's going to be uncomfortable conversations. So we've had it recently in DWG where there might have been some conflict in views, but having a structure and having values, having your expectations within the group really, really help to bring it back to that because we are all coming at it from a positive angle, but pulling it back to those values, those expectations actually is getting a bit more comfortable being uncomfortable with one another. So they're just some learnings that we've had along the way there. Hopefully that's useful. Part 2, we're just going to talk around how to make it everyone's responsibility. And I think previous places that I've worked, that DEI has almost been a HR people team responsibility, and I think all of us here know that that isn't the case. And while HR people does play a key role in supporting that, it can't thrive in isolation. Like, it needs commitment from everybody. And this is something that we're still working on as a business, right? And as a diversity working group. We're by no means the finished article here. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but I believe like nothing changes if nothing changes. So it's really important that we continue to evolve, we continue to make it everyone's responsibility. And here's just a few of the things that we've noticed like recently that have had a significant impact. Um, First of all, that upskill and educate piece is like, you don't know what you don't know. So actually having these conversations, bringing it front and center, looking to educate the business around it can be really, really useful. So whether that's, I don't know, you might provide some workshops around unconscious bias or inclusive leadership. You might choose to do a company-wide takeover. It might be part of the ongoing communication that you share internally. I think it's really, really important to actually bring attention to this and create dedicated time and space to focus on this stuff. So one area for us, upskill and educate, so important. And I think that feeds really, really nicely into the setting the clear expectations. So once you've got everybody kind of on the same page, a universal language of how we're going to talk about this across the organization, it's setting the clear expectations. So that is clear expectations within the diversity working group that we have. So like Noor mentioned, we have a rotating chairperson, we have an SLT representative, we have dedicated actions that we take away. That itself helps to build accountability for the initiatives that we're driving and that we're looking to achieve. I also think defining the objectives. So like, what are we looking to focus on? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And having those conversations is so important. So that's where I think the diverse representation within the DWG really starts to feed all of this. Um, and then now where we've got to a place where we are setting clear expectations, each team are now beginning to own their DEI efforts for their own department. So we look at marketing, for example, marketing are now starting to own DEI efforts from the work they're producing. Our commercial teams are starting to own it from representation on site and things like that. And I think it's these expectations that we're setting of people across the business, and we're talking about it across the employee life cycle. So whether that's onboarding in the L&D side of things that we spoke around on the slide before, where it's company-wide comms, engagement surveys, offboarding, DEI is showing up across the business, and we're having these conversations, and it becomes more front and center, and these things become way more natural to discuss. So having those expectations is so important. And then the final thing I think for me, as a point in terms of making everyone's responsibility, is actually celebrate those diverse perspectives. So Noor showed our calendar earlier, recognizing those cultural holidays and marking those. We have 13 events across a year. These are normally like educational pieces, explaining what it is, why it's celebrated, how it's celebrated. It's so important to be talking about these in a public, open forum. And the most impactful way that we've had around celebrating diverse perspectives is actually having employees who are outside of our diversity working group telling their stories. So whether that's Slack updates, company meetings, and I know Noor will touch on this in a minute, but having that outside of your working group actually starts to ingrain itself across the business as well. So there's some kind of like ways to do it. I think what we're going to do now is give you hopefully some ideas and inspiration about what we've been doing to try and bring this stuff to life at Not on the High Street. So, and how this kind of ties into our pillars as well. So I'm not going to talk to all of these. I'm just conscious of time. But I think one of the bigger projects we've had probably over the last 6 to 12 months was a follow up from unconscious bias workshop that we ran across the whole organization, but was reviewing our whole recruitment process. And we've had lots of discussion, conversations as a group, wide group, taking everybody's views on board here. And we've got to a place now where we run our job adverts via gender language checkers. We anonymized screening on all of our applications, so no identifiable information around like name, age, gender, location, education, to eliminate those kind of potential unconscious or conscious biases. And then I think the other one I would kind of touch on a little bit is that Slack updates and sharing communications, being front and center and showing up constantly from a DEI perspective. And Noor?
Thanks, Ben. And so what I thought we would do as well is just to bring some of this again a bit more to life, give you some examples around some of the events that I previously showed you. So the first thing is around education and celebration, which I think Ben's already spoken about quite a lot, but just to kind of bring this a bit more to life. I mean, we had Chinese New Year very recently, and we had a Chinese employee who is not part of the diversity and inclusion group who's willing to share their experience of what they do. But then we also had someone from our senior leadership team who, again, isn't part of the diversity working group, but had lived in China for a few years and was, a white man who could offer a completely different perspective into, actually what he learned from living in China and what he learned from Chinese New Year, and bringing that together. Again, we think has a much more of an impact on the business. There's never any compulsion again with sharing, and we're trying to make sure, in order to make it everyone's responsibility, that it's not always just on someone from DWG to signpost and share their own experience. But very often people in that group are also really wanting to share. So we've had a lot of that too. We've had company takeovers where people have explained how they observe Ramadan and maybe shared family pictures. We've had people talking about pride. We've had people talking about how colour can affect everyone and kind of the accessibility issues with that. So that's just one thing. And we also have celebrated the event. So you can see, I think in the picture below, for Eid, once fasting was over, we had a whole spread one day in the business. And it was a chance as well for people to try different cuisines that are maybe more associated with that faith. So it's an experience that we're trying to bring to everyone too. And we think that makes it much more long lasting. And then if we look at our sellers, what we've tried to do is make sure that we're recognizing them as well. So we've done many call to actions to say, hey, we know Diwali's coming up. It would be, if you do celebrate this, it'd be lovely to hear from you. Or let's say it's Pride Month, we'll do a call to action. And there's multiple different layers to this. So one way we might be that we've rewarded some of those sellers by offering them credits for our platform that would allow their listing to be higher up in the rankings, just as a way to say, like, the way that you would give a Christmas present to someone in a different capacity. We might have also invited those sellers to come and speak at our company-wide takeover. So we had that for Pride, where we had some LGBTQ plus partners come on, share their story. And again, like, we might surface those sellers specifically around those occasions. So, if we maybe in Black History Month, we're showing Black-owned businesses. And again, there's this, what we've found is one of our challenges, but a really interesting challenge, is making sure that we're being authentic about who we're bringing forward and who we're championing at those times. Because as you can imagine, when it comes to something like Chinese New Year, there might be lots of sellers that don't celebrate Chinese New Year that that might have, let's say, a biscuit with a snake on it, and actually we're trying to make sure that we're being more mindful about who we select to have that platform at that time, and maybe be on front page on our website or on our socials. And then we've got recognizing all of our customers as well. So having the authentic collections and learning from that, like I've touched on that a little bit there with the sellers, but also, it's learning, like, what would, if you have like a Ramadan collection, actually something maybe that has gelatin in it might not be appropriate in that. And we've had, like Ben said, we've made mistakes on the way and really learned and made sure that those collections are actually representative of what people are more likely to buy at that time of year. And again, it's been wonderful to kind of see that representation, and particularly for someone like myself who saw the very much beginning of it in 2019 when that just wasn't there. And then we've weaved in inclusion wherever we can. So that with our colleagues, that includes like more creative ways. Like, we have a quarterly offsite, and what we try and do is make sure the catering in that is always catered to an event that's maybe nearby or has just passed. So for Chinese New Year, we had our offsite at the end of January, and we had Chinese food to celebrate that. And it's a really lovely way, again, of bringing that experience element in for staff, giving that talking point, and making sure that we're giving back as well to those small-owned businesses that celebrate those events and recognizing them in that small but impactful way.
Amazing, thanks, Noor. last slide from me. I feel like we've done a really quick whistle-stop tour. I feel like me and Noor could have talked for hours and hours on this area and given some more practical examples and a bit more detail. What we will do after is we've got a few resources that we are just going to share. So CareScribe have these. Hopefully you'll receive them afterwards. But we've got a copy of our strategy template, just if it can help give you some structure in terms of how to get started, or maybe you're already doing this and it might need a little bit of tweaking or fine-tuning. Hopefully that could be useful. Our kind of events calendar that we work towards, like Noor said, the ones out there on the internet can be very overwhelming sometimes. So having a few less to focus on might be helpful. And then just like a retrospective template, like we found this so useful for people to fill out asynchronously on a Miro board. And then we would come together and work through that and discuss it. So thank you for listening. Like that's very, very quick whistle stop tour. I'm gonna hand back to Claire now, and if there's any questions, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. That was such a polished presentation with loads of really, really brilliant actionable things for people to take from it. We've had a few messages in the chat which you may not have seen as well. I've got a message from Susie saying thank you so much, Noor and Ben, super helpful, getting lots of thank yous in, and also a few people at the start as well, Noor, who some people just saying that everything you say is resonating, and thank you for your powerful comments and for sharing your experiences. So just wanted to make sure that you both heard that and saw that. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. I have one first for you, selfishly. I'm going to jump the queue, which is just a question around, obviously, you know, these working groups that you created. You're asking people to talk through their lived experiences. So I was curious to know what strategies you use to create and instill trust and like a psychologically safe environment for people to be willing to share and to voice their opinions and concerns. And I don't know who wants to take that question.
I don't mind jumping in, Noor.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
cool. So I've worked in a number of organizations, and I actually think the psych safety that we have at Not on the High Street is the best I've ever worked anywhere. And I think like there's a few reasons that comes down to. One is like honesty. Like I think we have these discussions, we talk around it, we address these things when they come up. And I think it's not one of those things that, oh, I don't know what to say. Am I going to say the wrong thing? Like nobody's penalized or scrutinized. Like I think that we have those open, honest conversations. I think the other thing around Not on the High Street as well is like trust is so high, like to each other. And I think those two elements, honesty and trust, really help to build psych safety. So when it does come to not necessarily being direct and asking people to share their stories, but people are more forthcoming with that. They feel comfortable. They feel at ease to be very honest with their lived experiences, their struggles, the information they might want to share. I think it's so important that yes, psych safety is great, but that also supports the DEI efforts across the company as well. So
yeah, I would build on that a little bit too, but I totally agree. I think from my perspective, how we probably started it was we started it off being it's voluntary. Come and join with the senior leadership team if you want to air your views. But you're absolutely right. Not everyone is immediately going to feel comfortable with that, especially if they've had maybe a bit more of a traumatic experience in the past. And so we also then had these anonymous listening sessions with this external specialist who was never going to identify who said what. And you really need the people at the very top to kind of, I think, show that vulnerability first. So we've had people from senior leadership talk about their mental health struggles. We've had, leadership, like I'm in leadership, talk first about actually here are the things that I've gone through. And I think it's that typical Brené Brown, if you listen to her, which is, share your vulnerability, and it reaps back, it comes back, it takes away that shame, and it makes sure that people know that this is a safe space.
Couldn't agree more. And that's a theme that comes up quite often, actually, Noor, through the various skills sessions events that we've hosted. It's around really leading with intention from the top, and that's setting the standard for the culture throughout the business. It's so hugely important. Right, so we've had a question come in from Jane, who has said, firstly, really interesting presentation, thank you. In terms of feedback, do you have any tips in getting more people to answer your survey? So Jane's experience is that they found when asking for feedback or sending out a survey, they actually get quite a low response. So I don't know who wants to take that one first.
I can jump in because I hate surveys. If I'm being really honest, it's probably an easier thing for me to talk around. Thanks for the question, Jane. I think like for me, it's about getting creative in terms of how you capture that information and at what point you capture that information. So I think we've all experienced like survey fatigue, and I've got another one that I need to fill out, and so on. Some of the things that we've been trying as a people team, and we will roll this out into like wider company and DWG as well, specifically, is how do we get that information? So one idea, we're using Miro boards at the moment that people can just go and drop their thoughts on asynchronously. So we can leave that running for 2 months, 3 months, or however long it take. Sorry, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before we kind of close that and then start to collate that. Rather than going, oh, here's a Google form, here's a web link that I need to go and fill that out. So one advice would be like look at where you're capturing the information and the moments in your business where it shows up. So is it, I don't know, we're in person every Thursday and getting everybody to do a quick pulse check and ask them a question in the office, or is it a Miro board and you do it asynchronously rather than oh, I've got another check-in survey, or oh, I've got to do this, or oh, I've got to do that. So I would say get creative and look at those touch points across your business where you can capture that information.
Yeah, I think as well, the other thing to add to that, Ben, from us, from a DE&I survey perspective, though, obviously you're the absolute expert when it comes to people surveys, but we've found that if we can communicate that timely, so like we've gone out before and said to the whole business, hey, here's our strategy, this is what we're looking to achieve, here's our values, here's the pillars, here's what you're going to hear from us, and then there's been a survey quite soon after it, as part of maybe just a general engagement survey, but part of that will cover D&I and say, like, what do you think about D&I? What did you think? Is there anything else we should be adding? And I think when it's front of mind, you're more likely to get that feedback there and then. And sorry, the other thing I'd add is if you have people in a group that represent the D&I group, you can get feedback that way. It doesn't have, it can be, look, come and speak to, if there's someone that you're more friendly with or you feel just a bit more comfortable with, speak to that individual person. They can be the one to surface your feedback without you having to be identified.
Yeah, one last thing I would say as well, and Noor kind of hints to it, is close the feedback loop. Like you've got this survey, you've got this information, feedback to people what you're doing with it as well, because there's nothing worse than giving your feedback and then you don't hear anything. So I think actually seeing traction behind people's feedback will encourage people to give more feedback itself.
Brilliant answers and tips. Thank you both. We've got time for another question, which is from Tom. So Tom said, based on your experience of working at larger employers, would you say it's important to embed ED&I into the culture whilst the business is still small enough to get full engagement from everyone? Don't know if you have a view on that, either of you.
Do you want to go, Noor? Do you want me to jump in?
I'm trying to understand the question. I mean, it's important, I think, regardless of size.
Yeah, so I guess Tom's question is around, and Tom, please comment in the chat if I've misunderstood. But so around like larger employers, I suppose the question is around like the impact that you can have at a smaller employer is like the assumption would be bigger because there's maybe less red tape and process to go through versus at a larger employer. So their question was around, is it important to embed it in whilst your business is still small enough? But from the presentation that you've just given, Noor and Ben, it really seems as though it doesn't matter the size of the business. You just maybe need to tweak and formalize your strategies and tactics to make it on the agenda. Tom, and Tom's responded now in the chat, so I can just add some clarity. What I meant was, is it important to focus on ED&I early on in the business whilst you're less likely to have blockers, particularly at a senior level?
Yeah, I think I would say it's important at any level of size of organization, whether you're one person startup and like looking at your customer base all the way through to enterprise level organizations. I do agree. It's probably once there is like less red tape, there's less blockers, there's less structures, you might be quicker to get off the ground with this. I think my advice would be just making sure you sustain those efforts because I think, like I said earlier, there's no real silver bullet to this, and it's about the sustained effort over a period of time. You can do that small or large scale, but that consistency piece is key to me.
Yeah, I think, and hi Tom, by the way, we used to work together. I think what I'd say is that you might the suggestion from me would be to pivot slightly differently, and that we've shown the strategy, and that probably does work more for a small medium business. I think if you're a larger business, what you tend to find is that you can start affinity groups. So, you know, everyone who maybe shares one demographic is together and they have their own group. And I think that you would probably approach the strategy maybe with more of a representative from each of those coming together, building that strategy that we've seen already, then going back and feeding into those groups. There probably is a bit more red tape, but it's absolutely something that you can still do at any, I think, regardless of the size. My genuine opinion is you can always make a difference, no matter what. You don't need budget. You do not need like senior leadership buy-in, though it's great. There are definitely ways that you individually can make a change within your own team.
Brilliant. Thank you. Very empowering, very empowering message to sort of sum up the webinar with, Noor. I will just ask, we've got 3 minutes left. So before I wrap up the webinar, Ben, I'll start with you first. If you had to choose one key takeaway people should leave this session with, what would it be?
Yeah, good question. I thought about this, and there's probably a few different things I would want to say. I think my probably overarching one is that you don't need to be from a minority demographic to go in and support and actually make a difference. So I am white male, and I don't have any kind of identifiable minority demographics or associate to that. So I think sometimes there's this stigma or stereotype around that, oh, because of that, I can't go and get involved, or I can't go and make an impact, when actually I'm coming at it from a really positive place. I want to make a positive change, and I want to support others in the organization to do that. So my advice would be, don't let that be a blocker to going in and making a start on this stuff.
And Noor, what's your one actionable takeaway for people?
Yeah, thank you. I think mine would be a mixture of, like I said, you do not need budget to make a difference. I think often we look at the barriers first when it comes to something like this, and it can then feel secondary because, you know, the business's revenue and their commercial aims always feel like it's going to trump what D&I is trying to do. But actually, there are so many small changes that you can make. You know, you can empower managers to have simple conversations with their teams, which make them automatically feel like they belong more. You can offer flexibility as a manager that, again, just has that ripple effect and makes someone feel like they're valued in a company. And I think in terms of making it everyone's responsibility, my biggest tip would be keep things on rotation. So our SLT sponsor isn't just one, they rotate so that everyone has a responsibility to learn and to share and to kind of take on some of that load. And the same with the chair, it's rotating. Same with when we've had note takers in the past. And it means that everyone comes at it with a completely different lens and a different way of doing things, which is amazing, but also it makes it everyone's responsibility.
Well, what a way to end the webinar. Thank you both so much for your time this past hour. Really, really appreciate you giving us an insight into what you've done at Not on the High Street. I will just quickly wrap up in the last minute. So thank you to all of the attendees for joining the call and being engaged in the chat. It really makes a difference. If you enjoyed today's webinar, please help us spread the word and share skill sessions with your LinkedIn network or your peers. Every bit of word of mouth helps, and we're really keen to grow the community. The next 2 skill sessions events are live on our website. You'll get an email tomorrow with more details about those, so please keep an eye out. And yes, as I said, go check out those sessions that are live for March and April. We'd love to see you join us, and thank you once again for joining us for February's skill session. We'll see you again next month. Cheers, everyone. Bye.